This podcast is brought to you by Shift Management's Supervisory Leadership Certificate course, where online learning and live web coaching bring out the very best in frontline and middle managers. Move from operations to management thinking and develop the skills for leadership, reaching your company goals at the same time. Check out our Supervisory Leadership Certificate course on the shiftworkplace.com website today. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I'm very excited to offer to you Bruce Ross, who has a proprietary approach to leadership development that is research-based and has been honed over 37 years of working directly with the full spectrum of leaders from emergent through to established. He operates in the realm of the inner game of leadership, and the resulting framework, which is called FlowPreneur and it's trademarked, is unshakable, bold leadership that integrates brain science and optimal psychology directly into business to help individuals and teams tap their unsuspected reserves of performance, intelligence, and potential. Sounds like everybody needs this, Bruce. He also delivers this marriage of leading academic research and real-world pragmatism within his highly regarded MBA-level leadership development programs and university short courses. Bruce has spoken at over 33 annual conferences and been published internationally on the topic of leadership and accessing peak performance states. He has personally coached over 1,200 business owners, leaders, and entrepreneurs. Wow, I am so honored to be interviewing you today, Bruce.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
And welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast today. So that was the formal introduction. Maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about who you are personally and what you do. Give us some personal insights.
Sure. Okay, so married, and there's a bit of a story. About 3 years ago, 2 daughters, younger one, Danny, was diagnosed with lymphoma cancer, and she's 25 at the time. Unfortunately, she died of lymphoma cancer, and that in itself was a massive shift, devastation within the family, but it also has direct relevance to what it is that I now do and how I do it and the fervor or the passion in which I do it. So what I learned, I don't know if anyone here has experienced cancer either personally or in their family directly or nuclear family, but when something like that happens, you can't help but go into research mode. You know, what caused it? What can we do? Are there alternatives? And so on. For me, the message was very simple, that we have well-being, we have our psychological immune system, we have our biological immune system, then we have disease, and then death. And so what it is that I do, I'm really all around how do we consistently perform at a higher level, so stay in the well-being, psychological immunity space. The thing that actually rips through the firewalls of our psychological immune system and biological immune system is stress. And at the moment, we are living in stress on steroids with the COVID environment that we're in. So we need to understand what's going on in the body. How do we rebalance and reset our nervous systems? Because while stress is useful from time to time, it's a horrible place to live. And if it's chronic, that's when you have the diseases such as cancer set in, because we have cancer cells in us, but what triggers it? So I wasn't quite going to go there. But you asked me, I was going, I'll just tell you a little bit about my family. And whoops, there we go. So the things I enjoy, I'm in New Zealand, and so I enjoy the outdoors. I do ultra marathon trail running, and I like going out into the forest and running through those. Although, unfortunately, about 4 weeks ago, I rolled my ankle, so I haven't been doing much running at the moment.
Oh, dear. Well, actually, Bruce, it's interesting when you said you weren't going to go there. Something about the questions that I'm going to be asking triggers other things for people, and they often say something personal. And I'm very sorry to hear about your daughter. I'm sure that it has been some very special learning for you and your family to go through that and still to mourn and to love and to have her present in your life in a different way, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And she is definitely at the heart of what it is that I do now. She's one of the inspirations that keep me going, yes.
And regarding running through the woods, it just sounds so wonderful. But then, of course, when you roll your ankle, you have to think, well, what else can I do? Well, there is bicycling on your back. It just doesn't have the same appeal, does it?
No, it's not quite the same.
Well, that was a great answer to the question. Can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you believe made you into the person you are today?
What I will share, because I've been thinking, what's the standard or what set the optics of how I look at the world? And my earliest conscious thought was when I was about 3, and I decided I want to run from here to there, and I did, and it felt glorious. I remember the feeling afterwards. It was like everything was there was an ease and just the glory of life was the sensation. And in my immature mind, I made a direct notation that sensation, that love of life, that feeling of the sense of wind in your face was superb. And comparing it to the other experiences that I'd felt at that tender age, those other experiences were just sort of lackluster and didn't really mount up. And so that everything thereafter, I was looking for those sorts of peak experiences, and therefore lack of enthusiasm when, is this what life's about? It's a bit flat or a bit empty. So I've always been seeking for those peak or high point experiences. And I'll share another one when I was 17, and we'd been tramping through the bush. And the group of us, we'd been going all day, so we came, it's about 5 o'clock, we're quite exhausted, dropped the packs off, and I went up the top of a hill to see where we were. And on the way down, I started to run, and then I started to sprint. Now, that was incredibly dangerous because the tracks were winding, near roots and rocks and boulders and creepers and things. If I had fallen or broken my ankle or whatever, no one would have known where I was. But as I was sprinting down this track for about, I don't know whether it was 1 second or 3 seconds or longer, I felt like I was flying. It was just, it was another one of those peak moments, peak experiences, that there's a direct line of sight to how I felt when I was 3. And I thought nothing of it. I thought it was a bit, that's not, I thought nothing of it. I thought it was a bit mystical. I thought this is weird. It wasn't normal life experience because usually you walk and it's heavy and so on. And I remember every time I'd go tramping, I'd be looking for a track to run to try and experience that same feeling, just that glory of life feeling. And it's possibly even why I continue to running today. So those two I've subsequently found have been moments of flow. So they now have this science around the whole area of flow. They can predict it. There are triggers. And when I look back, it had all the hallmarks and all the triggers of being in a flow state. And being in a flow state is when you're in the zone. It doesn't have to be when you're doing something physical, although it typically is, but it could be when you're deep in conversation or you're lost in conversation. It could be when time expands or time contracts. But I'm sure everyone here has probably experienced it. But what I'm interested in is how do you make that predictable and regular and even systemized as opposed to random. So as I reflected back, those are 2 high point moments, and they really also have steered what it is that I do now.
Really like those answers that you just gave. This idea of the sort of wind in your face and the well-being and the joy of being in flow as being really motivating you to do things throughout the rest of your life. How did that motivate your choices for career?
I fell into, I can't say I made deliberate choices. I think a lot of my experience, I look back and I was bewildered by life. So I had those peak experiences and a lot of other things I didn't understand. And I was looking around, is this what we do? Is this what humans do? Is this? So I can't say I chose careers, but what I found myself drawn to was recruitment. So I was doing HR work. So enjoying being around people. My first role was as a social worker. So clearly people orientation and wanting to do good or help or whatever. I was far too emotionally immature at the time with that sort of role. I was dealing with street kids. I was only 21, 22. Emotionally, I really couldn't handle it. But then I went from there into recruitment, into HR. I was there for quite a while, maybe 14 years, and then into my passion, which is the personal development piece. And so I joined a company called the Entrepreneur Success Program, which was a combination of life coaching and business coaching. So I hadn't had any experience in business coaching or the business side. And so I really enjoyed that. And that was really the genesis of what I do now, because I moved from there to being an internal performance coach with an organization, working with business owners and their sales teams. They made me redundant and helped me set up my first business, which was Ignite Business Leadership. And that was into the area of leadership development, which in my world was another way of saying personal development, because what happens at a personal level, you can also transfer into team and organizational leadership. So it's been people orientated. It's been looking to understand how do you what is this thing potential, the adjacent possible. We have this thing called immense potential. What does that actually mean and how do you access it? And over time, that I think if you look in terms of a triangle, it's been a refinement over time and climbing towards the peak, towards what it is that I do now, which is specifically the whole FlowPreneur piece is you've got preneur, which is your drive, your spirit, your mojo, how you turn up on a day-to-day basis. And then you've got flow, which is a peak state of consciousness where we perform our best and we feel our best. So looking to put those two together as the sharp edges of the arrow tip. So over time, it's been a gradual process of refinement to get to what it is that I do now.
It's like you combined your thinking skills and your people skills and also your interest in personal development and professional development together to create what you've got.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So from the groups that you're born into, what would you say has most influenced your sense of culture and self?
I grew up in a single-parent family. So my parents divorced when I was one, which was not the thing. These days, blended families are pretty common. But back then, it was not the done thing. And my mother was really ostracized as a fallen woman for having divorced and that sort of thing. So there was stigma that I felt growing up. And so there was an element of hiding, not showing too much of yourself, staying quiet, not inviting friends around. So in some respects, it was quite a sheltered childhood from social interaction. And there weren't any major issues. But there was a fragility around it because it was my mother bringing up 3 kids and she was just bringing in secretary wages. We weren't wealthy. So that had an influence in terms of how you view the world and how tough things are and how they can be. But it also brought out a deep respect for women and what women are capable of, and certainly positive and negative experiences. But certainly my experience of women is that there is a nurturing capability which is absolutely essential. And I'm pleased to see that in these times, the feminine approach to leadership is actually what's needed. Compassion, consideration, empathy, more the softer side. There is certainly a place for the masculine side, but it's certainly with what we're going through with COVID at the moment, we need that space to breathe, to find ourselves, to recalibrate before we start to march off. And I don't think we could march as dominantly as we did before. There's so many other things to be taken into consideration. So that upbringing was obviously influential.
I mean, really needing to insulate yourself against the disapproval of society, and at the same time being impressed with what your mother was able to accomplish. And you saw that courage in addition to the nurturing and the sensitivity that you mentioned before. Also, it took strength and courage to do those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Anything else? I mean, people are born into a country, into a region, into an area. It can be, small town, medium-sized place, rural place, can be a city, might be a big metropolis. So that affects people. Also, their race, their ethnicity, their gender, the age that they're born into, all of those groups that we just are born into that we only gradually become aware of. Anything else stand out for you?
Well, the environment I grew up in was, I'm European, New Zealand European, and basically all the education, there weren't too many other races. So there was that. I didn't get caused to have to even think about it. It was just like, oh, maybe there might be one local Maori, Indigenous people here called Maoris. So I really didn't have to think much in terms of that. I didn't suffer racism because Europeans were the predominant race at the time. It was a middle-class school. It was a stable upbringing. I think back in childhood, there was a lot of sunshine, outdoor play. I didn't really have a consciousness really of the different groups until much, much older. So I wasn't confronted from that perspective. New Zealand growing up at that time was reasonably stable. At least that was my perception as a child.
As a child, you're not conscious of a lot of things. You become conscious of them later on. But that sense of stability can be very strong. The stability, the sunshine, the enjoyment of being outside, that can also be very strong in your sense of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sense of physicality and the need for exercise and that sort of thing, growing up, we didn't have shoes. Well, in the winter we did, but it was get outside and play in the trees. We always had a lawn out the front and fruit on the trees themselves, citrus fruit and so forth. So there's a sense of abundance.
Then, of course, you grew up and you chose to be in different groups. You might have had friend groups, professional groups, interest groups. You might have adopted things about other cultures that, as you came into contact with them into your life. Can you tell me about that?
So I went to university, and I spoke a little bit earlier about my bewilderment with life. I think there's a bit of naivety as well. I went to university on the preconception. I wanted to be one of the elders of the tribe within society. I wanted to be one of the wise ones. And so I thought, where do you go to learn about wisdom? Where do you go to learn how to be trained up to be an elder of the tribe within society? And I thought, it's university. That's where you go. And so I went to university thinking you'd learn about life and wisdom and so on and purpose of life. And of course, that wasn't the case. But while I was there, I did come across an organization that's what they were into. So it turned out to be an esoteric school and learned a whole range of things. It was a bit like Hogwarts, really.
Did you have moving staircases and magic? Did you learn to cast any spells?
Well, it certainly felt that way. It was like walking into a lolly shop, because the range of subjects there it's almost like another university in terms of subjects, but there are fascinating areas like color and movement and psychogeometry and meditation, and I even touched on the tarot and palmistry. And I mean, these are, back then they were very edgy. These days they're quite commonplace. Mental healing.
In a university, you experienced this?
No, not at university. This was another organization. So as well as doing studies. And so that's where the thirst got quenched in terms of, wow, this is a bit more about what life's about. These are the things that really should be spoken about. So it was an organization that I was with, well, I'm still with, but very intensely so for about 10 years. So concurrent with university studies. But of course, university, I was doing economics and politics and just normal stuff. So that was a group that absolutely has been formative in my thinking and my overview of life and what's important and values and that sort of thing.
Are you able to name this group or not?
I'd rather not.
Okay. So this is really interesting, though, because you kind of had an education of the whole person, really. From the group that you belong to, you had this one aspect of yourself that you developed, and then in your studies, you developed something else. And then also being in university and coming into that piece of yourself as an adult was another part of growing into who you are as well. So I'm thinking they probably all helped to nurture you in different ways.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So the group that I was in was very, you could say, high level philosophical purpose of life. Is there life after death? What is that? So high level, and then the university stuff is more mid-level. So how do you get a job? What job are you going to get? What skills do you have? And then, of course, you live your life and you try and blend the different philosophical approaches.
So for your personality, which would you say is the temperament that you were born with? And then what would you say you've added on to from your experiences in life? Which would be the personality part?
I would say there's definitely been defining moments, and Danny's death was one of them. So that was like cracking open what was there. So that was like a before and an after. And I think the pivot point around that was that you don't, number one, in all of your projections into life, when you have children, you don't project that they'll die before you. And so when it happens, it causes a deep existential reanalysis. And that's what happened. So for me, there was a cracking open that if this could happen, what else could happen? Or what were my expectations of life? And they should be predetermined. They should happen a certain way. And so that broke that. So before you grow up, you form a certain way, have certain projections, and it should always happen. You know, that's the way life is. That's because that's how it's turned up. But in many respects, what happened with our family then is similar to what's happened to the human race and COVID at the moment, is there's been a cracking open, and the things that you project into the future, because who can say where it's going to go from here? And so therefore it causes you to step back and go, well, what is life? What is my relationship with life? What is it I'm missing? What is it I missed? How can I be more present? And just the whole nature of life gets more deeply reevaluated. And so what I have found subsequent to that is a treasuring of the moments, recognition of what it is that really deeply moves me, whereas before I may have thought, well, yeah, there'll be much more of that. And I was a bit familiar and blasé with it because I had such a privileged upbringing, because there's always more, there's abundance. But then something like that happens and you realize that there isn't necessarily abundance, or it's not going to continue as fluidly as you anticipated or intended. So that was definitely a turning point. and a slowing down, an internal slowing down for me, and a reevaluation.
There's a songwriter, Leonard Cohen, who said, everything's cracked. That's how the light gets in.
Yeah.
And when you said things break open into the unexpected, it reminded me of that line of the song.
Yes, I've heard that, and yes, makes a lot of sense. It's true. It's true that there was a new light that came in.
Yeah, because personality is always changing, and it really is dependent on what we're exposed to and how we respond to that. So what about a time that you became aware that your understanding of the world was just you and your cultural surroundings and not normal?
Yeah, so there was a particular event. So when I was 18, I went to the Philippines, and from little New Zealand, where it was quite tame, the first thing that hit me when I got out of the plane was the heat. I never experienced heat and humidity like it. The second thing that I noticed was that there were men with guns. And in New Zealand, even now, the police aren't armed. And so for me to actually be up close within arm's length of a gun, that to me was shocking, because it was martial law at the time. And I was being billeted with a family. It was a family of 7 boys. And the place we were staying in Manila, Dasmariñas village, was a gated community. And by gated, it had security guards at the front, and there were 12-foot high walls in between the houses. Very expensive. I arrived at night. It's a culture shock, gated communities, men with guns, security, and then going into this massive house, opulence that I'd never experienced before. The lawns were being cut by servants with scissors. And I was going, what? This is just so radically different. And the food smelled different and tasted different, and they had servants, which, wow, what is that? So completely spinning and sort of taking it all in. And the next morning we got up and we went out. We were in a van and we went out through the gated community, came to the first set of traffic lights, stopped, and all the boys were in this van, chattering to each other, teenagers, a bit similar age. And what happened at this traffic light, it was descended on by beggars. So I didn't see them. I just looked around this van, and I don't know, it would have been maybe 20 odd beggars. And some of them had very grotesque faces. I remember it's almost like a horror movie type picture, and reaching out and things. And I looked at, and I thought, well, what is this? And the disparity, because in New Zealand, you don't have beggars and very little homelessness at that time. And I looked at these guys to see, well, what were they doing? And they were totally oblivious. They'd grown up with it, and they were full of their own world. And I couldn't understand how you could have poverty, because there they had literally shanty towns and little houses that put together out of corrugated iron. It was horrific. Well, from my mind, it was horrific. And then yet there's massive opulence. And I looked at them, and they weren't paying any attention because they were so used to it. And the thing that stuck with me was, how could there be such disparity in the world? How can you live with it? How can you see that every day, and maybe there's something wrong with me? And that's one of the reasons why I went to university, to study economics and politics, because I thought, how the hell can this actually happen? So that was absolutely a defining moment, and still lives with me, because how can those two polarities still exist? You can reason it through that there is economics and politics and trade and human greed and all the rest of it. But that was a heavily defining moment in there as well, in the mix.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean, because I experienced that in several countries. And the disparity just never left me, as how unfair it was, that the extremes of wealth and poverty were just wrong. There should be a diversity within the economic differences, but to have those extremes of complete opulence and grinding misery were just so unfair. To see the lack of empathy from the really, really opulent groups, and the ones who are in the worst situation also not seeing any way that they can get out. So you can see how those two polarizations play each other out all the time.
Absolutely.
That was a really good example. Reminded me of so many things myself. So we're reaching the end of the interview, and I'm just wondering if, when people are hiring you to work with them and you're telling them, well, this is, how I work most effectively with my clients, what would you tell them?
So I work with business owners and business leaders who are still looking, or they're still on the hunt for their higher selves. They've still got the capacity, and they still really want that for themselves and their families and the people that they interact with. So it's how to have greater leadership impact both at home and at work. So I work one-on-one coaching. I also have the FlowPreneur program itself, which is an online program. And there it's giving the basics and the understandings about how do you move through from the worry, the fear, the anxiety, how do you shift that? So the mindset training, and how do you tap into the perpetual energy supplies? The place that I come from is, I believe, what lies at the core of energy, in fact, of life is energy. And therefore we need to be aware of what takes and what saps it, and also what gives it. And so the program is designed around that. So the first place that we go to is what saps our energy. So what renders us an energetic colander? How do we plug those holes? And then how do we tap into high energy states? And then the next step is how do we bring the science of flow into that, so you can make that a more regular, consistent, predictable process you can be in. So online program, one-on-one coaching is typically how I work.
And then you introduce people to the system that you've created, and then they join that together with their own particular reasons why they would have come to you for coaching or taken your program, correct?
That's right. That's right. So the key is it's a done with you program. So it meets you wherever you're at. If it is that there are issues and challenges that you want to overcome, then we give you the tools to be able to overcome them and then take it even further.
I like that expression, done with you. Yeah, that's great. There you see the done for you stuff all the time on the internet. But I'm talking more about what you need to be able to work effectively with people. Well, might tap into, say, maybe one of your core values.
Okay. So the people that I've found get the most out of it is that they know that they are up for something. It's not just they want to be good, they want to be great at something. They want a full expression of something. So they know that there is a purpose, that they are on that purpose. They might not be able to articulate it, but they want to be a full expression of that, and they are not there now. So they are less aversion. I think someone recently said he was underwhelming himself.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's another person I'm working with at the moment. He's a law firm, 80-person law firm, and chairman of the board. He said he lost his mojo, didn't understand why. And so we've been working through that and giving him the tools and the processes. So there's a recognition that we're not living at the fullest level that we possibly can. And what are the tools, what are the understandings, what are the concepts to enable us to get there?
Mm-hmm. They have to be willing to embrace their existential questions to work effectively with you.
Well, yes, the spiritual purpose is one of the dimensions that I take people into. Absolutely. So I'm interested in bringing spirituality into the workplace. And I don't talk about spirituality, but how that turns up to me is how do I ensure I'm tapped into high energy states, and how do I share those high energy states with the people around me, so to bring them up? Because when we have high energy, we're in the best version of ourselves. If I can help you have higher energy, you're in the best version of yourself. And so I think that's absolutely what's needed at the moment, because there's so much that's sapping or hemorrhaging our energy.
Yes, I so agree with you. So this has been very interesting, Bruce. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or any question that you think I should have asked you that you would like to speak to?
Yeah, there is one thing which I think is an important consideration, and it's one of the many gifts. I call them Danny's gifts. So in the journey of her passing, there are many and multiple gifts. And one of them came when I was getting counseling through this whole process. And this counselor lady was very direct, not your typical softy type counselor. And she said, Bruce, I need you to understand something. I said, okay. And she said, there is nothing wrong with Danny. I said, what? She said, there is nothing wrong with Danny. I said, come on, she's got stage 4 cancer. And the counsellor said, no, there is nothing wrong with Danny. Parts of her have cancer. And two things went on in me. One was I felt the absolute truth of what she was saying. Another part of me didn't want to admit it, because in it, I recognized that I had been dealing with Danny as a broken, sick, damaged person. So I was coming out from a lesser place in myself because she was damaged. But if there was a premise that there's nothing wrong with Danny, so the spirit life of Danny was, you can say the mojo, the spirit, the intrinsic Danny was definitely still there. Parts of her were suffering pain, anguish, anxiety, and so forth with chemo and radiation. So it changed my whole approach to how I dealt with her, that I was speaking to the whole Danny when I was speaking to her, and then we would also talk to the sick parts. Now, how this relates to what it is that I do is that there is nothing wrong with you or me or the people out there. something is sucking or leaking their energy, because when you have high energy, we're in the best of ourselves. When we have low energy, we're not. Okay, I get that. But if we look at it that I'm not performing the best that I can, we tend to look at that and there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? And so straight away there's recrimination, and we're starting to reduce our own energy level, as opposed to there is nothing wrong with me. The system is working well. I just don't understand the system and how it's working, in that I am leaking energy. So if the system works well, there's nothing wrong with me. What is it that's leaking the energy? It's a very different conversation. And I think it's a much more healthy conversation. And it's one that can take a person much further than, why the hell can't I do A, B, or C? So that's the thought that I would round out. So if there was a question you could have asked me, it would be... what's one of the core premises of this energy concept is there is nothing wrong with you. Something is leaking your energy, or something is giving you energy. And either one of those two researchers are fantastically nutritious.
I really love that. So much self-criticism is at the root of people's disease. And so when you start to see yourself as being whole and complete and healthy and full of all of the wonderful things that you were born to do in life, it's completely different than thinking, what's wrong with me and how do I fix it? It's just not the same approach. It just gives you tools to be able to deal with things and to have things that don't go well become smaller in significance.
Yes, that's right. Manageable. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure you have some information you'd like to share with the audience. We'll put that into the show notes about your FlowPreneur program and about how they can get in touch with you if they're interested in coaching. Do you work with people all around the world, or do you work with people primarily in New Zealand?
No, all over. One of the benefits of Zoom.
It is. Yeah. Thank God for the internet.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So any closing words before we end the interview today?
I've enjoyed this. It's not the standard approach to podcasts. It's been circling around to get to what's of value, what's crucially important for a person. So I've really appreciated the approach. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're most welcome. I certainly enjoy it. I really love to hear people speak about what matters to them. And you have given us a lot of wonderful gems of wisdom to focus on. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bruce Ross is a business coach with a very well thought out system based on energy levels and flow. He seeks to help people realize their potential, both personal and professional. I was very intrigued by his approach and honored that he shared his personal story about the passing of his daughter and how that affected his own purposeful approach. I first met Bruce because he sought me out as an interview guest on his podcast, FlowPreneur, and our conversation resonated so much with me, I wanted to introduce him to our Culture and Leadership Connections listeners too. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you will join me, Marie Gervais, again soon on an upcoming episode. Remember to share any of the episodes you love with a friend, because the more people hear our guests, the more people will benefit. If you are so moved, I would love to hear from you about any of the episodes that provided you with an aha moment or that you particularly enjoyed. You can always email me at marie@shiftworkplace.com or connect with our Culture and Leadership Connections Facebook page. Thank you for joining us, and may Culture and Leadership Connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Hey, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Do you love these insightful and moving interviews published twice monthly for your listening pleasure? You may not know that it costs between $300 and $500 per month to pay for our podcast episodes. Shocking, but true. Well, now you can help support this podcast by showing your love with a little skin in the game real money on the Patreon website. For as little as $5 or as much as $50 a month, you can contribute to keep Culture and Leadership Connections alive and healthy. Your donation is invaluable in helping us connect the hearts and minds of people across cultures and professions for happier and more humane workplaces. I know you will call on your inner generosity, knowing that your contribution is a practical demonstration of love and support. Check out the patreon.com/culture and leadership connections page to see what subscription level feels right for you and find out about the special loyalty perks at each patron level. That's spelled Patreon, patreon.com/culture and leadership connections. Thank you for your generosity.